I figured when the Los Angeles Rams finally came to their senses and decided to fire Jeff Fisher, that their next head coaching search was going to revolve around finding a young offensive mind type of guy to turn around the ship, to right the ship, to lead the ship going forward. Because you think about it, look at the recent first round picks that they've spent on the offensive side of the ball to get very little return out of it. 2013, Tavon Austin. 2014, Greg Robinson. 2015, Todd Gurley. And then this past year, they gave up so much to move up to number one to take Jared Goff, the quarterback out of California. And when you look at what happened on that offensive side of the ball, it was another year where the Rams were absolutely terrible. Offense sells tickets, especially when you're in a new market like Los Angeles. You're already competing with so many different things to do in LA, in Hollywood. You can't be a boring ass team to watch. And that's exactly what the Rams are. And you can't be a consistently competitive team if your offense is one of the worst in the league and consistently stinks up the joint, like the Los Angeles Rams offense did in 2016, and frankly has done for a number of years under Jeff Fisher's leadership. I use that leadership word very, very loosely here. But look at that again, though. Tavon Austin was a top 10 pick. Greg Robinson was second overall. Todd Gurley was a top 10 pick. Jared Goff, they gave up a lot for, and he was a number one overall pick. So in a 4-year stretch, they invested 4 picks in the top 10 on the offensive side of the ball. That is a lot of draft pick currency, premium draft pick currency at that, invested in the offensive side of the ball for it to stink. Now, you could talk some about Tavon Austin 2013. That's kind of a byproduct of a crappy draft class. Something to be said about that. 2014, you just say it was a missed evaluation of Greg Robinson. I missed on him too, believe me. Don't get me wrong. But it is what it is. Todd Gurley, who had that promising rookie season, really regressed in year number 2 for a variety of reasons. He had to figure they were going to go an offensive guy. Now, I thought that the Rams were going to try and put in some type of bid on Sean Payton. As you look at Sean Payton, he's been with the Saints 11 seasons now. You can kind of see the end of the road is coming. Now, maybe it's one of those things where Sean Payton and Drew Brees are attached at the hip, and as long as Drew Brees wants to stay in New Orleans, the organization feels committed to Sean Payton staying there because maybe Drew Brees wants Sean Payton to be there. That could be it. But I really thought that for a Rams team that needs a turnaround, that needs somebody to mentor and guide the young quarterback and get a maximum return on the investment for that young quarterback, I thought Sean Payton would be a really, really good fit. So I was surprised when nothing really materialized. Even if it required trading of draft picks and so far a coach trade between them and the Saints, I thought that could have been mutually beneficial for both parties, frankly. But that didn't happen. So it was interesting when they ultimately zeroed in on Sean McVay, the offensive coordinator of the Washington Redskins. On the one hand, I look at it and I see Sean McVay, who's been an offensive coordinator for 3 years in the league. You look at some of the other hirings, he's been a coordinator at the NFL level longer or for more than a lot of the other guys have been. And you talk about Redskins offense in 2016 that was 3rd in total yards, 12th in points per game, that had a pretty explosive passing game. And in particular, over the past 3 years, you really saw some development in Kirk Cousins to the point where the Redskins are probably going to have to pay him like a franchise quarterback this offseason. And you're talking about a Kirk Cousins with back-to-back 4,000-plus yard seasons. You're talking about a passing game with guys like Jordan Reed and Deshaun Jackson and Jamison Crowder and Pierre Garcon. I mean, that was a Redskins offense that was legit in the passing game. That was a Redskins offense that could move the ball. That was a Redskins offense that could score some points. So it's not a surprise to hear that a guy like Sean McVay, who was already, a hot name when he was made an offensive coordinator at age 28, that 3 years later, he's age 30, and teams are going to be knocking on the door for him for a head coaching gig. So I'm not that surprised that he got the gig. I may be a little bit surprised that the Rams went in this direction, but maybe the thought process was we went down the veteran kind of retread option, and that didn't really work. We need to find that young guy that could potentially lead us in a different direction, a new type of direction, a more modern type of direction that we could potentially build this franchise, not just build, but bill. When talking about going out into Los Angeles and going out and marketing and advertising your product, you could build this young head coach as one of the faces of your franchise for many years to come. But when you talk about young head coaches, it's always kind of a mixed bag because you've had a lot of guys um, between the ages of 30 and let's say 35, 36 that have been given opportunities over the years. It doesn't happen all the time, but it has happened. And in recent times, over the past 25 years or so, it's really been a mixed bag because you've had some really, really bad hires ultimately. Lane Kiffin with the Raiders comes to mind. Now, was it just that Lane Kiffin was that bad? Or was it that the Raiders situation was that bad? Was it a combination of everything? Was it just Al Davis sabotaged him before he got a real shot and he never had a shot? And he was put into a situation he was ultimately ill-equipped and unprepared for coming from USC? Possibly. Raheem Morris, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He was 32, I think, when he was given the gig or something like that. At first it looked like it might have worked. He was in part maybe sabotaged by Josh Freeman's regression and ultimately flaming out. But he was a guy that ultimately seemed ill-equipped and ill-prepared for his gig. Dave Shula going back to the mid-'90s Bengals. He was the. You look at the last name and you say, "Oh, he's got to be great." His daddy was once hired by the Colts in his 30s, and he went on to win Super Bowls and go to the Hall of Fame, and he did all of that. David Shula did not. Now, he was also a part of a really bad Bungles organization in the 90s. That could have played a factor. Eric Mangini was another guy that was hired very, very young, and with stints with the Browns and then the Jets, you could say it was kind of a mixed bag with him, but ultimately he hasn't gotten another head gig since, so what does that tell you? So there's been some bad examples of guys being given that early opportunity in their career, and they flame out somewhat spectacularly. But on the flip side, there are those examples of guys that are hired in their early 30s and they go on to great things. Bill Cowher, when the Steelers hired him in 92 away from the Kansas City Chiefs where he was their defensive coordinator, Bill Cowher came in and he made a difference, and he was in charge for 15 years and multiple trips to the AFC Championship game, 2 Super Bowl appearances, Super Bowl title. When they hired him, he was like 32, but someday he'll end up in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So they did right there. You go back in history, I mentioned Don Shula. John Madden was a guy hired in his early 30s. You think about those names. Mike Shanahan was hired by Al Davis in his early 30s in the late 80s, and Al Davis kind of got weird with him and sabotaged him, but later on, Mike Shanahan went on to win 2 Super Bowls with the Denver Broncos at the tail end of John Elway's career in 97 and 98. You got other recent examples too. John Gruden, Al Davis again, giving another young guy a chance. And he turned the Raiders around before he got traded off to the Bucs, where he helped them win the Super Bowl in 2002. Mike Tomlin takes over for Bill Cowher, and he's won a Super Bowl, made it to another Super Bowl. So for all the bad examples, and you'll hear plenty about the Lane Kiffins of the world, the Dave Shulas, Raheem Morris types. You've also got Bill Cowher, you've got John Gruden, Mike Tomlin, Mike Shanahan. So to sit there and say, because he's young, that there's this exciting chance that he could be great and wonderful, that could be true, or he could be incredibly over his head and completely flame out. That is also true. So to me, it's important to kind of look at the staff and see what he's going to do there. And I thought it was very interesting when the Rams hired Wade Phillips to be their defensive coordinator. Because you look at Wade Phillips and you talk about one of the best defensive coordinators of the past 20 years in the NFL. I think no question about it. Not a guy that's a great head coach, but in terms of when you put him in charge of the defense and have him just solely responsible for the entirety of the defense, magic happens. Early on in J.J. Watt's career in Houston, and then obviously the Denver Broncos, they carried Peyton Manning's washed-up ass to a Super Bowl in the 2015 season. Wade Phillips, from a purely defensive standpoint, is a genius, and he is one of the great defensive coordinators, and he deserves to be thought of in that upper echelon. I thought it was interesting that you would bring him in knowing that your best defensive player is Aaron Donald. Now, granted, I think Aaron Donald could play in any damn scheme and probably could play as an outside linebacker in a 3-4 or an inside linebacker in a 3-4. He's that goddamn athletic and good. Dare to challenge me on that if you want. But with that said, I think it's interesting you're bringing the guy whose experience has always been in the 3-4, and a lot of the personnel you have is a 4-3. We'll see what they ultimately choose to do in terms of the defensive scheme. But I think it's interesting that a young coach like a Sean McVay would bring in a guy that's almost 40 years his senior in Wade Phillips. Not saying that's a bad thing, because if Wade Phillips isn't going around and trying to undermine him, Wade Phillips doesn't strike me as the type to do. Wade Phillips can run the defense and leave it to Sean McVay to primarily focus on the offense, which is where the focus needs to be. Now, in terms of who they hire as the offensive coordinator, I guess remains to be seen. I think McVay is going to end up taking on the play calling duties and responsibilities, which I think is a bit of a mistake. I understand the thought process of, this is how I got to this point was by calling the offensive plays, and I need to be involved in that. At the end of the day, when you're a head coach, you have so many different things you're supposed to be focused on, so many things you're supposed to be worried about. The last thing you should be doing is having to worry about calling plays, especially when you're a 30-year-old first-time NFL head coach. It could potentially get overwhelming. It could speak to a lack of great leadership in terms of an inability to delegate responsibilities to others. Good managers get things done. Great managers get others to do things for them as well as they could have done it themselves. So when I look at this hiring of Sean McVay, I think it's curious. I think it's interesting. I think there's a lot of risk reward here. I think he could be overwhelmed and be gone in 2 years, or I think he could do incredible things and work wonders with Jared Goff, and the Rams in a couple of years are perhaps the team that is leading the way in the NFC West. Because you've got a Cardinals team on the wrong path, you've got a 49ers team that stinks, that's even worse shape than the Rams, and you got a Seahawks team that's here now, but at some point in time, as that defense starts to age, if they don't replenish that talent there, they could start to regress a little bit. So looking ahead, maybe 2 to 3 years, if the Rams can get Jared Goff right, and they can get that offense to be competent, they could be looking at potentially running that division for the next several years to come. And that's ultimately what this hiring comes down to. I can't sit there and just knock them for hiring the 30-year-old dude, because there's examples of young coaches working out. Now, McVay is the youngest first-time head coach in modern NFL history. That is absolutely true. And I don't know if the Rams were in a position where they should have been gambling on something like that. Also, I don't know, though, that there were a lot of great candidates out there. Maybe this is where they made the mistake of not firing Jeff Fisher after 2015 and making maybe a strong push for somebody like an Adam Gase. Because then you could have still went and got either a Jared Goff or a Carson Wentz, had 1 year of one of those guys under Adam Gase's system, and you feel a lot better for 2017. But that's ultimately not the decision they made or the path that they went down. Either one or two things I think is really going to happen here is Sean McVay is going to be really bad and so overwhelmed by everything that he's going to get McDaniels and last maybe 2 years and spend another decade as an offensive coordinator before he actually gets another shot at being a head coach. Or he could surprise people and work wonders with Jared Goff and some of that young talent on the offensive side of the ball. And we're talking about the Rams making the playoffs in 2018. One of those things that happen. I don't know which one. I have to say at this point in time, even though I like the work that McVay did with Kirk Cousins the past few years in Washington, you saw nothing out of Jared Goff in 2016 that indicates he could be the dude. And at the end of the day, Sean McVay still has Les Snead drafting for him, so good luck to you. And he's got Jared Goff quarterbacking for him, so unfortunately, good luck to you. There are a lot of things pointing in a direction that indicate to me that this whole Sean McVay experience in Los Angeles could end up being a disaster. I hope not for Jared Goff's case. I hope not for the Rams organization's case. But it doesn't look like it's the best thing in the world to happen. Because you're even potentially, with the hiring of Wade Phillips, makes so much sense on the one hand, you could potentially be changing the entire dynamics of what you're doing on defense by either switching to a 3-4, which a lot of your personnel is not suited to run, or having Wade Phillips try to lead a defense that primarily runs a 4-3, which is not dealing to Wade Phillips' strength. I hope I'm wrong, but I can't say I'm the most confident about this hiring because of some of the factors, frankly, that are even out of McVay's control.